It looks like a ship elevator, but it's actually a $7.7 billion insurance policy. Hidden in the heart of China's mountains, this mechanical colossus doesn't just lift 10,000-ton ships. It lifts an entire province out of economic isolation and prepares China for a world where global trade can vanish overnight. This isn't infrastructure. It's a silent superweapon in the next economic war. And it just changed the rules of global power. You wouldn't expect the future of global trade to begin in a place called Guizhou, a province known more for its jagged cliffs and deadly landslides than economic innovation. For decades, this mountainous region in southern China was a logistical black hole. Trucks crawled up collapsing roads, rivers turned into raging torrents during monsoon season, and entire villages were cut off for weeks when landslides buried the only highway in or out. Locals had a name for it, the mountain that devours men. Foreign investors had another name for it, no-go zone. Guizhou's sharp limestone peaks, some rising like dragon's teeth, made traditional infrastructure nearly impossible. Shipping goods from here to coastal ports like Shanghai could take over 2 weeks and cost 3 times more than equivalent distances elsewhere in China. Canals, too slow. Rail, too dangerous. A conventional lock system, you'd need 20 chambers just to climb the nearly 200-metre vertical difference in elevation. So instead of fighting the landscape, China decided to build through it. And what emerged wasn't just a clever workaround, it was an engineering provocation. In the middle of this hostile terrain, China constructed the Goupitan Shiplift, a structure so massive it can carry a fully loaded cargo ship up the side of a mountain in under 30 minutes. Not around the mountain, over it. This isn't a scene from science fiction. It's real. And it's moving over 5 million tons of cargo a year through what used to be considered one of the least accessible places on Earth. And yet the question remains, why go to such extremes? Why build something so absurdly complex and expensive in the middle of nowhere? Because this isn't just about cargo, it's about strategy. And the answer lies in what happens inside this steel behemoth, and what happens to the world when China doesn't need anyone else to trade. From a distance, the Goupitan Shiplift looks like some kind of industrial monument, towering concrete pillars stretching toward the clouds. But step closer, and you realize this isn't just a lift. It's a mechanical cathedral, built with surgical precision to defy gravity itself. The elevator's mission is simple. Take ships the size of football fields, weighing up to 11,000 tons, and carry them 199 meters straight into the sky. But how do you lift something heavier than the Eiffel Tower without disaster? You start with a floating fortress. At the core is a steel chamber, 40 meters long, 12 meters wide, and engineered to hold not just the ship, but a body of water cradling it in a perfectly balanced liquid cushion. Think of it as an elevator tank, a sealed chamber that behaves like a bathtub bolted to a skyscraper. Now imagine that bathtub being pulled up a cliff. To make this happen, engineers built 4 colossal concrete towers anchored 70 meters into the bedrock. These towers aren't just for support, they guide the entire system like vertical train tracks, using a system of cables, gears, and counterweights so advanced it borders on absurd. Each lift is controlled by 256 steel cables, and these aren't your average wires. Each one is strong enough to tow a jumbo jet. Laid end to end, they'd stretch over 80 kilometers. These cables are woven into a gear rack climbing system, where metal teeth the size of human heads engage with millimeter precision. If even one tooth slips, the entire chamber could spiral into catastrophe. So they're made from a custom alloy, strong enough to resist seismic shocks and flexible enough to survive decades of micro vibrations. To absorb the massive forces involved, engineers added hydraulic dampers, enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool, capable of withstanding impacts equal to a small meteorite. At the same time, emergency brakes, sensors, and a quintuple redundant control system run constant diagnostics. 5 separate computers cross-check every calculation in real time, and if one disagrees, the system halts instantly. Every lift cycle takes just 30 minutes. That means this machine can do up to 24 full ascents and descents per day. In total, it moves almost 5 million tons of cargo annually through a vertical waterway carved straight out of a mountain. The numbers are mind-blowing. The execution is even more so. Because this system doesn't just work. It works with the kind of brutal efficiency that terrifies competing economies. And the moment the chamber reaches the top, the gates open. The ship glides out, like it just skipped time and space, and disappears into a man-made reservoir. To the crew on board, it feels like teleportation. But to China, it's something far more powerful. Proof. Proof that it can rewrite geography, bend nature to its will, and shift global trade not just across borders, but over mountains. For decades, Guizhou was a name that rarely showed up on economic maps. In a country racing towards superpower status, this province, home to 36 million people, lagged behind. Isolated by razor-edge cliffs, choking rivers, and constant landslides, Guizhou earned an infamous nickname, the place prosperity forgot. Even China's breakneck industrial machine couldn't penetrate it. Shipping goods from here to Shanghai took 2 agonizing weeks. The cost? 3 times higher than anywhere else in China. Foreign investors stayed away. Local industries stagnated. Entire generations grew up with no real connection to the country's booming coastal cities. Then came the Goupitan Shiplift, and with it an economic earthquake. Suddenly, what took days of crawling through treacherous terrain now took just 2.5 hours. A vertical shortcut that didn't just save time, it redefined the cost of doing business. Shipping expenses plummeted by 67%. Industrial output surged by 42%. Foreign investment soared by 83% in just a few years. Manufacturing hubs sprouted near the riverbanks. Agricultural exports found their way to global markets. Villages, once defined by subsistence farming, were now building technology parks and logistics zones. In less than a decade, Guizhou went from forgotten province to strategic powerhouse. But it wasn't just about Guizhou. This was a test case, a prototype, a message. Because what China proved here is something that sent shockwaves through global supply chains. You don't need access to the sea to dominate trade. You just need to build your own rivers into the sky. This wasn't a fix for one province. It was the blueprint for a new kind of inland economy, one that could function even if the world turns hostile. It's called dual circulation. An economic doctrine that says we'll trade with the world when it suits us, but if we're ever cut off, we'll be just fine. The Goupitan shiplift is the physical embodiment of that strategy, a self-contained artery that keeps China's lifeblood flowing, no matter what happens outside its borders. And the transformation doesn't stop with goods and numbers. Tourism has exploded. Locals now run businesses catering to thousands of visitors, fascinated by this futuristic marvel. New careers have emerged in maintenance, logistics, automation, even international consulting as Chinese engineers export this know-how to Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and Africa under the Belt and Road Initiative. What once looked like a dead zone is now a launch pad. And it all started with a single question. What if we didn't go around the mountain, but over it? This isn't just a vertical elevator for ships, it's a vertical exit strategy. Because behind all the steel, hydraulics and concrete lies one cold, calculated assumption. Global trade is not guaranteed, and China is preparing for what happens when it fails. The Goupitan shiplift may look like a marvel of logistics, but it's also a piece of infrastructure designed for economic survival. Here's the scenario. A global conflict erupts. Ports close. Shipping lanes choke under sanctions. Naval blockades freeze supply chains. Container ships sit idle, waiting for a world that's no longer cooperating. Most nations would panic. China? It activates its backup plan. Because while the world was building ports, China was building alternatives deep inside its interior. The Goupitan Shiplift is part of a hidden network that includes the Three Gorges Dam, the South to North Water Transfer Project, and thousands of kilometres of engineered inland waterways, all connected like veins in a vast internal circulatory system. This is not theory, it's doctrine. China calls it dual circulation. On paper, it's a strategy to boost domestic consumption while maintaining external trade. But in reality, it's about decoupling. It's about making sure that if the rest of the world suddenly turns off the tap, China's engine keeps running. The Goupitan Shiplift is physical proof of that strategy, lifting not just ships, but the entire concept of self-reliance into reality. It's also a military-grade logistics solution. In a crisis, this inland corridor could be used to move critical resources, fuel, grain, industrial supplies, without relying on vulnerable coastal shipping lanes. And remember, this is just one of many. China is already building more vertical lifts across its western provinces. The technology is being refined, scaled, and exported. Chinese engineers who worked on Goupitan are now working on similar megastructures in Laos, Pakistan, Kenya, and Uzbekistan, quietly constructing a web of resilience far from the headlines. It's not flashy, it's not on magazine covers, but it's working. Because while the West focuses on sanctions, naval alliances, and choke points like the Strait of Malacca, China is thinking inland. It's bending rivers, lifting ships, rewriting maps, and by the time the world realizes what's happening, it may already be too late to catch up. The Goupitan Shiplift isn't just lifting cargo, it's lifting China's immunity to collapse. And if it works the way Beijing plans, this insurance policy might quietly become the most important machine of the 21st century. While the world races to build taller towers, smarter cities, and faster machines, China is quietly building something else. Not in plain sight, not in the headlines, but in the shadows of its own geography. The Goupitan Shiplift isn't just lifting ships, it's lifting a veil over a massive inland strategy that's been unfolding for years while the world looked the other way. It's easy to be distracted by China's outward-facing innovations, 300-mile-per-hour bullet trains, AI-powered surveillance cities, megastructures stretching into the clouds. But these are theatrics, the show on the surface. The real transformation is buried deeper, in the river valleys, in the highlands, in places like Guizhou. And it's not about growth, it's about resilience, because China has asked a question that most countries still refuse to face. What happens if the world stops playing nice? What if the oceans become battlegrounds? What if trade routes vanish overnight? What if sanctions, blockades and conflicts turn globalization into a memory? While the West has been expanding outward, China has been fortifying inward. The Goupitan Shiplift is not an anomaly. It's a keystone, a model for how to move billions of dollars worth of goods without touching a single seaport. A machine that turns one of China's poorest regions into a logistics artery. And a warning shot. Because it works, and it's scalable. Already, similar projects are underway in Western provinces. Shiplifts, floating canals, high-altitude dams, dual-purpose reservoirs, each one a piece of an inland lattice, capable of keeping supply chains alive even if the coasts go dark. And beyond China's borders, these technologies are quietly being exported under the Belt and Road Initiative, from Pakistan's mountain corridors to Africa's river basins. A network is forming, and it doesn't care about oceans. This is the new Silk Road, not romantic camel trails or maritime shipping lines, but vertical water highways etched into rock and steel. This is the new face of empire, not armies, not navies, but infrastructure that outlasts headlines and elections. And yet, most of the world still sees the Goupitan Shiplift as a marvel, not a message. They see a ship elevator, but they miss the strategy. The intent, the quiet audacity of a nation planning 50 years ahead. Because if this is just one project, buried in one province, serving one river, how many more are out there? How many other machines are being built? Not for today, but for a future where China stands alone and stands ready? That's the part no one's asking. But maybe they should be. Because the next great shift in global power? It might not happen on the battlefield, it might happen in a mountain, behind steel gates, where a river climbs into the sky and never looks back.